A conversation with Ian Azacostas on Shadowlands player power.
Hey everybody, a little heads up before we get started here is this is going to be a little different than the interviews you've seen in the past with the devs. This time around, Blizzard requested a discussion on this topic rather than a normal interview where we would have a whole array of questions covering many different subjects. It was the first time ever I'm aware of that Blizzard has agreed or requested to actually sit down and have a back and forth with the
I don't remember
members
this
of the
either.
community. Luckily, I was chosen, so I hope you enjoy it and understand why it's not just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, etc. Let's get on with it. I would just like to extend our gratitude. Mr. Ian, welcome.
Hey, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
How are you working? How are you guys working, especially with the Shadowlands coming?
I mean, at this point, this is the new normal. I think we've kind of found a groove. There was definitely a few weeks of just, figuring out using the tools from home, getting everybody's webcam and all of that set up. I think the biggest challenge was meetings actually are great, probably even more efficient in a lot of ways than being physically present in the same room. The biggest challenge I think was the impromptu creative brainstorming jam sessions that often just happen, bouncing an idea off somebody in the hallway or swinging by somebody's desk. Trying to recreate those moments that are important for creativity when we're all, in a more structured,
sporadic
environment
stuff
has been a challenge, but I think we figured things out.
Yeah, we've had the same issue here, obviously on a smaller scale. Especially when we're bouncing ideas around for our bigger content, we're having to do it through Discord and things. It's not that same creative soup that you can kind of make when everybody's just flying things out very quickly. Now, obviously, this is going to be more of a conversation, is the message I got regarding some recent things. Because, I mean, let me explain my standpoint, is one, the Covenants look fantastic. What we've seen, and you've expanded and fleshed them out with the weekly events that have come into there, the way the zones are being modified, all those elements just look so wonderful. And of course, the transmog, the mounts, all those elements. But the concern has been raised many times since the alpha, is that you've taken a position that we've not seen before, is that you're going to be bringing in class abilities that are going to be locked off to those players. And the more we look to the future on this issue, is that it seems like it disrupts not only the top end, which is where a lot of the sort of focused arguments and emotional arguments have been, but actually can resonate throughout that community, all the way to every level of play, including guys who just want to play around with something for a little while and will be unable to do so. So we're just looking to get an idea of why we've made that choice, why you think that's a benefit.
So I think, a lot of it comes down to a question of identity versus moment-to-moment decisions. And I think WoW as a whole, games as a whole, are arguably a large set of choices and decisions that you make on a wide range. And I think in WoW, if you've had a whiteboard or something to illustrate on, but if you imagine a spectrum of permanence and scope of a decision you make. And at one end of that spectrum is the first decision you make when you start playing World of Warcraft. What's your class? That is completely permanent. Obviously, you can make separate characters, but there is no way to change that. That affects a vast array of your capabilities and strengths, and that is the foundation of identity in WoW. Race alongside that, though that's more malleable, has lower impact.
Yeah,
the far other end of the spectrum,
it's like talents.
I mean, there's also micro choices, like literally what button are you going to press next while you're in the middle of a combat.
Yeah,
but
I guess so.
There are the choices that you make that are more a loadout. They're not part of your identity. They are...
Does anybody else get nervous when everybody says the word loadout? I don't know. I get kind of nervous about that. It makes me feel like it's going to be like a Call of Duty type thing. You know what I mean? No, I don't know. It's just... I usually don't like whenever WoW tries to copy a formula from another game in this way. I think copying some ideas is okay, but it's been a bit much.
What are the tools that you're taking into this boss encounter, into this arena match, into this Mythic Plus? Pick your talents, equip your trinkets, what consumables are you using, all of that. Those are decisions that you are making tailored to a specific situation, but they're not part of your identity. If you take Windrush Totem as a shaman, you're not a Windrush Totem shaman. That's not who you are in WoW.
No.
That's just something you're using for a situation. And covenants from the outset were imagined as something that were closer to the identity end of the spectrum. And that, like, from the earliest conception, it was, this is a weighty choice that you're going to make. And to be weighty, the choice has to have some degree of consequence. And we know there's a wide variety of playstyles and preferences across WoW. Some people are literally in it just for the transmog. Others are in it for increasing their number by 0.1%, and that is the thing that's most important to them.
Mostly the transmog.
And both, and a mix, and everything in between. And so we want to make this as an informed decision as possible, as much as we can. But I think the goal in creating a choice is for it to be a difficult one. Ideally, if you're looking at two options, there should be some things that pull you in one direction and some things that pull you in the other. And you take one fork in the road, and that becomes a part of who you are going forward. That's again, that is, as you said, as I've said a bunch in the past, a core RPG element.
They do it again. He does it again. It's the core RPG element that they're fucking hung up on. And because they've invented this problem that they need to solve, they're going to make the game worse. Like, I don't get it, man. I do not fucking get it. This has never been a feature in the game before. This did not exist in Wrath. It did not exist in Cataclysm. It did not exist in Mists of Pandaria. You just got your gear, and then you played your character. Like, I don't understand why this is some kind of like a fucking focus that they have now.
Differentiation.
There's no reason for this.
While yes, when faced with any difficult choice, of course you'd like to say, well, I don't want to choose, I want to have everything, or I want to have the best parts of bucket A in the situations where those are best, and I want the best parts of bucket B in the situations where those are best.
Yeah.
But that's a natural desire to opt out of the choice, but the choice is what adds some richness and depth to the world and greater variety among the characters that we play, the interactions that we have, the strengths and weaknesses that we bring to bear in any given encounter, in any given situation we get into.
Okay.
This is like, it's all theoretical fucking hippy-dippy pie-in-the-sky bullshit. Like, it sounds good on paper. Like, this sounds really good. Like, if you write this on paper and you say, this is my manifesto for how the game should work, and these are the ideals that we want to design the game around. Yes, saying what Ian is saying makes perfect sense. But the moment that plan hits the player's hands, it goes into the fucking garbage. Because this is not how people play the game. It's not how they make decisions. It never has been, and it never will be. And it's becoming even less of the case even now. This is the kind of stupid shit, theoretical game design with no context of how players design and interface with the game that makes no fucking sense. Like, this is never gonna work. Like, I'm so fucking annoyed by this, man. Here in fucking Raid, man, just make a new character? No, you don't make a new character. Nobody wants to make a new fucking character. This is stupid. It sounds good, but it's not in the... They're not designing the game in the context of how players play it. They're designing the game in the context of what sounds good in their head. And you know what else sounded really good in their head? Azerite armor. And how did that turn out for the players? It fucking sucked. And this is the same exact shit.
There's quite a lot to unpack there. And I think the biggest frustration we probably feel with this is, one, most of us probably agree with that goal. I don't think there's anything wrong with that goal. And certainly, from my understanding, not only my own point of view, but of many others, and we did a lot of research into this, there's no one asking not to swap covenants. In fact, the idea of committing my character to a covenant is great. And I think it's something that World of Warcraft has lost along the way.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's the practical side of this that really sort of gives it that going too far feel. And historically, we have seen the pendulum swing to the point where it's causing a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So those issues are far and wide. I mean, you brought up consequences there. And it's something that's very much been tossed around in our research is like, I like the idea of a consequence.
Right.
And the issue with that is that consequence is different for everybody. So if your consequence is
it's a really good point.
for somebody who's not particular, because we're only talking about player power here, right? That's the only thing that
Sure.
I have I'll speak for myself. Only I have a problem with the player power, because that severely impacts my gameplay, and it impacts the choices I might want to make down the line.
Yeah.
And we're literally talking about potentially giving up a hell of a lot, a very costly price, because when I was leveling, I didn't think that spell was particularly good, and now I realize actually it is pretty good, so I kind of want to try it. I go and try it, and now I have to give up my entire Covenant progression for that. I have to do some sort of quest line, and then I get there, and I'm not particularly happy with it, and then I need to do some sort of quite large grind just to come back. And all I wanted to do was try out a spell. You know, that was it. I just wanted to try out that spell. And we would feel, say, a lot of comparisons to TBC with Aldor and Scryer, and people would probably feel very differently if Aldor came with Cloak of Shadows, but Scryer came with Shadow Step. Then we would probably think of those things in a very difficult way.
That's actually a really good point. Like, the difference between Aldor and Scryer was so small it didn't really matter. But whenever you add in actual real abilities, then I feel like it makes it infinitely more complex. Yeah, I really like what he's saying here.
When it comes to the consequences, for a player who's not particularly interested in player power or has is less affected by player power, their consequence is almost meaningless.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
On the other end of the spectrum and everyone in between, there's a huge delta between those two. The consequences is severe. Quite severe in terms of what we do, especially given the difficulty we've had in the past with balancing a lot of this stuff. And obviously this time around, you've bitten off a lot more than before, is by introducing multiple systems at once.
Yeah.
And we obviously have a lot of pessimistic thoughts, not only from the fun side, that sometimes I do want to play with Abomination's Limbs of DK. It's hilarious. It just giant slap hands. It's so fun. Do I want to commit to that forever? Nah, not really. But it's hilarious. I want to mess around with it. And I'm a Death Knight, and he's a Death Knight. And I've never in the history of this entire game been told that, no, you can't do what a Death Knight can do. And that's where we kind of fall down with this completely malleable amount of consequence in the actual practical application of this system.
Fair. So
that's what it really is. It's the practical application. Like, I understand the ideal, and the ideal doesn't work practically. It sounds good, but the practical application will not work. Like what Preach is saying is 100% true.
So getting to the specifics, you know, I think the scenario where you feel like you can't experiment or you can't learn what it's like on the other side of the fence without having to make this big commitment.
Yeah.
That is a potentially separate solvable problem. I mean, we're talking about, aside from letting you use the abilities while you level,
or something. Yeah.
In the Covenant choice moment itself, having a little vision of your potential future that's like a imaginary battle arena in the Maw, where you can try out the abilities of the Covenant one last time before you commit.
Yeah.
I could imagine us keeping that open in all scenarios, so that even if you're in a Covenant, if you want, in a specific context, to play around at length in non-leveling contexts with a Covenant's ability, just to know how it feels without having to make that large commitment, that's a completely reasonable thing to solve. And yes, a lot of this comes down to balance, and that is admittedly a challenge. And there's a lot of the discussion around specific abilities is something we're paying a ton of attention to. Things that are either just incredibly weak, incredibly strong, where it could be a numerical issue, or things that seem inherently unbalanceable, like a cheat death that's available to one subset but not any of the others, and that's just a universally incredible effect. It's hard to stack up against other things. And in some cases, we may need to redesign abilities entirely. Because, yes, differences that you don't have control over can become just purely emotionally negative, especially at the competitive high end, when they're too large. I think in terms of choice with consequence.
I think that what Ian is missing is that it's unfun for more people than the top 1%. It's demoralizing for everybody at the beginning of 8.3 to see their friend get infinite stars rank 3 and dumpster them on damage because they had this buff that they don't have. It's demoralizing for everybody. This is not something that's unique to the top 1%. Anyone that participates in group content is going to experience this.
Just
like the Legion legendaries.
Problems with these systems. If you go back to the beginning of Legion, I think that the choice that everyone had to make at the beginning of Legion of which spec you want to focus on was a more impactful choice, and in many ways a more permanent choice than any choice that awaits you in Shadowlands. Because it wasn't just your artifact weapon, it was also, as we know, legendaries.
The relics.
And those could be weeks apart, and if you were a mage and you started off as fire and you had a couple of fire mage specific legendaries and all of your artifact power in your fire weapon, and you wanted to try out Frost, or you wanted to go Frost for a certain scenario, there were probably literally months ahead of you in order to get to a point of comparable effectiveness.
And that was bad. That's why you changed it.
There were problems there. I think the majority of the problems, frankly, were on the legendary side, because once you start talking about, Pyro Bracers and Scorch Belt versus no legendaries, that's like a 15% net effectiveness difference. That's almost an entire tier's worth of gear.
Did you know I played?
Yes, I want to pause one more time and say this. At the beginning of Legion, you could keep a second artifact weapon with a relatively close power level to your main artifact weapon. It wasn't as strong, but it was like maybe 10% weaker, because the way that artifact power worked was that the last points for your main weapon would be like the first 20 points for your alt weapon.
Did you know I played a mage during this time?
Perhaps.
Yeah, I had to bank my first legendary. It was unfortunate.
But that,
no comment.
And yet, that was something that was in the game, right? And it was awful. Disguised in the, construct of a very simple choice you've had to make for a long time. Oh yeah, what spec do you want to play this tier? But that was far weightier. So when we look at Covenants, yes, there are situations where you may wish you had a different tool available to you. Part of the challenge for us is making sure that the gaps are never too large, and that there's never a universal right or wrong answer, where it's like, oh, you're a rogue and you picked that Covenant. Yeah, that's just the wrong choice. Like, there's never a situation in which you're going to be happy that you're a member of that Covenant as a player of this class.
Classes. Let's look at Warrior. Wow. Look at all that talent deviation. Let's look at all this Azerite deviation. Let's pull this over here. Everybody uses the exact same thing because that's the best thing. And you know what happens whenever you're in like your average guild and you come into the raid and you're not using those things? You do less damage and you get replaced by somebody who is. If Ian wants to say that there are no wrong choices, then why is it that these choices are picked by every single person that's playing at the top level? It is the top 1%. You're exactly right. And everybody goes to emulate the top 1%.
Because, yeah, that's just a trap. But, again, getting back to strengths and weaknesses, I guess a question for you and for, kind of as a representative of a large portion of the high-end competitive community.
Here we go.
I think a trend and something that we have seen on the development team on a regular basis in terms of feedback is the desire to eliminate sources of variance, to eliminate any form of the dreaded RNG, anything that removes control from a player. Do you feel like it's an ideal endpoint for every hunter who is doing a Mythic Raid encounter across the world, really, to basically be the same in terms of their stats, their abilities, and the only difference among them is who can push their buttons more effectively, who can execute the mechanical aspects of their class?
I don't.
More so than now. Obviously, it should not be the exact same. More so than now. The thing is, we don't mind RNG. We mind how much RNG there is. Go look at the videos of Infinite Stars RNG. I saw Pilav made a post about him getting a rank 1 and Infinite Stars was his top damage by a mile. That's the RNG that players don't like. Having a cool trinket proc maybe one extra time during a fight, That's okay. But it's RNG. The problem is, like, you have the RNG on the gear, then you have the RNG in the fight. You have like 2 different levels of RNG. You can't control getting the gear, and you can't control how the gear affects your gameplay. That's the problem. It's compounding RNG that's extremely impactful to your player performance.
I don't see why that would not ridiculous. Be the case. I mean, personally, it's for me the difference between somebody who chooses at any point, and this kind of falls back into the discussion we've had, is that over the last couple of expansions, you've certainly muddied the waters of what we enjoy at the high end, and a lot of players don't realize it, but it's been happening since around about Legion, late WoD. Yep. When more RNG came into it. And for a lot of us, we genuinely felt so dissatisfied with our own characters because of the changes you guys made.
Yeah, I stopped playing.
And one of the greatest fun aspects of it was that being able to compete directly, and I can speak from personal experience, is I would compete directly with Razzie, I was a Death Knight, he was a Death Knight, and to see exactly, I know he's got the same as me, I've got the same as him.
Who can do better?
And we're trying as hard as we can to outdo each other, and we're not in the same raid, we're not even in the same realm, we're on completely different time zones, but we can do that, and then we feel like I'm a good player. Now, what I can tell you is, personally, I gave up DPS in late WoD because we were doing Black Hand and we'd had 200 pulls, and at no point was my DPS consistent. And what that meant was that I can be as good as I want to be.
You have no control.
I can plan as far ahead as I want to plan. And the result isn't in my hands anymore.
No.
And that made me very dissatisfied. And certainly it also becomes a bit of a meme when we have Infinite Stars then come into the game. And, abilities like that, where we're just looking at it and saying, who's in control here? Is the compute? Am I just running around? And one thing I do have is video evidence. I have never done more damage on my character than I did before we killed N'Zoth. And I have gained 10 item levels since then. Purely down to RNG, and it's extraordinarily dissatisfying to have that experience. Whereas,
who the fuck wants to go in and do their absolute best on a fight whenever they know that it's not even up to them if they're gonna win? Like, I don't give a fuck about that shit anymore. I used to really care about my parses. I made whole videos about it. Like, I have like dozens of videos. And look at this. Look at this. Maximum damage on Nazgrim, maximum damage on Garrosh, maximum damage on Shah Pride, on Odin, all Chromag, Siegecrafter. I did this on every fucking boss. And then they added a bunch of fucking RNG, and I can't do that anymore. And whenever I do it, whenever it does happen, it's not even because of me, it's because I got lucky. It's just fucking boring.
You guys always... I mean, for me, this is what's very strange about this whole thing, is one of the big feedbacks we had from WoD, which a lot of people disliked for various reasons. But the classes, super simple. You kept it super simple. You gave us some wonderful new spells, and class design was great. People could swap. We could just change and re-roll, just get some gear, and off you go to the races. What we didn't have was people setting up islands in their bedroom so they could go and farm AP. Or doing world quests over and over again, and and now we're looking certainly at the high end this time, where it looks much worse. But I'd also come that's that part. But earlier you brought up Legion, and I would say that yes, the legendaries. I mean, they were so RNG. It was difficult to swap between specs regardless. I don't think I was able to do it until the Nighthold. But the artifact weapons were our choice, and this is why we do have this pessimism. Is we were told by you guys, look. We know you guys are worried about choosing artifact weapons, where you're going to put this AP, so we're not going to change anything. And 2 weeks into the expansion, you had to alter the rogue ones because of the balancing issues after we went live.
And they nerfed subtlety rogues. I remember this shit. So this is what's going to happen, is somebody's going to want to go one covenant for their damage, and then they're going to nerf that covenant. They will rebalance covenants after release. Like, they have to. It would be stupid for them not to. And whenever they do that, I can guarantee you, every fucking time they do a rebalancing, people are going to get fucking pissed. They're going to be mad. They're going to resent it.
And all those rogues said, you told us you weren't going to do this. And then you guys did it. And that's why we have this definite pessimism, where we just think,
Yes.
Ultimately, for the content I enjoy, this severely disrupts things. I do truly believe it's going to disrupt things for a lot of people in about 2 to 3 months when that guy sees... it's let's say his DK chooses Kyrian because he loves Kyrian. It's so good.
Oh, loser.
And you're saying, okay, yeah, but you can go and try out the other abilities in, say, a Torghast closed environment or something. It's like, well, that's not what I want to do. I want to go PvP with it for now. I want to drag people around Warsong Gulch for a couple of days. But I still love Kyrian. I love the Mog. I love the theme. I love the weekly event. I love what I've done in my zone. And now, you know, for the first time ever, you're telling me that if I really want to do that, I actually have to re-roll a second DK to be able to do that realistically without having to overcome massive jumps and hurdles. And to all these things, we just feel like we're retreading the same ground, which was the similar thing with the Azerite armor.
And with the legendaries. I'll pause one more time. Not one more time. This is going to probably be more pauses. But Legion at the beginning had a lot of problems, and they improved. All of the things that Ian is emphasizing and saying are kind of goals that they have with Shadowlands. They changed those in Legion, and I think that most players would be in agreement that the game improved throughout the life cycle of Legion. By the time that like Tomb of Sargeras was out, you had all of your weapons that pretty much had concordance probably. If you played a lot, you could swap between them regularly if you wanted. And by Antorus, you had all the legendaries you wanted. It wasn't an issue. So they improved this and they got rid of it because players didn't like it in Legion, and now they're doing the same thing again. Like they're doing the exact same thing again.
Throughout the entire alpha, we were saying this isn't going to work how you guys hope, and then we spent the next maybe 6 or 7 months fidgeting through it until ultimately it was like, okay, we're just going to open it up. Sorry, there was a lot in your...
Okay, it is the same shirt, guys. It actually is. We both got the shirt for being in the event realm. Blizzard sent us the shirts. Thank you, Blizzard. Even though you guys are fucking up Shadowlands. Thank you, guys. We appreciate it. Yeah, it's the same shirt, okay? This has been acknowledged now. We can move on. Okay, good.
Sorry, but I was trying to get through there.
Totally. Okay, so okay. It's also a lot in yours. Let's see. So
yeah, this is why we have the conversation, I guess.
I completely agree on like RNG mechanics and variants within combat in terms of your performance, the range, like the delta between high end and low end infinite stars procs or whatever, is not a particularly satisfying aspect of gameplay. I think there's room for those things, but they shouldn't be the things that are the highest performers in the hands of competitive players. There's a lot that we've learned from essences, from corruption, from various trinkets, particularly like it's been a lot of topic of a lot of internal discussion among the team. The same way when we're designing a talent row, if there is an active button that requires skillful use and just a pretty much fire and forget passive in the row, the passive shouldn't be the theoretically optimal performing talent as compared to perfect use of the active ability that's much harder to execute. If the passive ends up being
any warriors in chat, I got a question for you guys. When was Furious Slash ever used competitively? When was Bladestorm ever used competitively? Siegebreaker was not used competitively for the majority of it. Never. This is, again, another bit of bullshit. It wasn't used at all for the entire expansion. It's been a dead talent for the whole time. And I'm glad for that. I always hated Furious Slash. This is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Like, these are theoretical things that Ian is saying that actually don't turn out to be that way.
Who is misusing or underusing the active, that's totally fine. But, you know, even just evaluating damage corruptions like Gushing or Infinite Stars against stat corruptions, the stat corruptions should have simmed better, and the fact that they weren't for a large portion of the tier or for many specs is a problem.
See, this is you know what the problem is the fact that he can look at it and say this was a problem. It not was a problem, it is a problem. It's been a problem for months, and you guys aren't fixing it. The game's been dysfunctional for months. It's like he's speaking on it as if it's like a third-party thing. This is an outcome of what his team did. It's not like this is not impossible for them to solve. They can solve it tomorrow. They're not solving it. And that's what the problem with the Covenants is that they're talking about it in past tense as if it's already dead and buried, so people have to play the game that's dysfunctional for months. I'm pissed. Oh yeah, Infinite Stars shouldn't sim that well. Well then fucking fix it. It's not like, what do you mean? Like, then just fix it. If you don't think that's how it should work, if you think the stats one should work, just fix it. They didn't give a fuck. Like, they don't care. They did like a couple of minor balancing changes at the beginning, and then it was still dysfunctional, and they said fuck it, and they just started working on Shadowlands. Am I supposed to expect this isn't going to happen with the Covenant abilities? No.
At the end of the day, if you do well in an encounter or poorly, you should feel like that's because of the, you played well or you played poorly. And yes, sometimes you get targeted with every encounter mechanic, and that's just how things go. But
sometimes
that's a whole separate layer.
Mm-hmm.
But that's different from the choices that separate people going into a match, going into an encounter. And I think that's a hallmark of the RPG genre. And I get that, like, the higher you go in skill echelons in all types of gameplay, the more resistance there is to the idea that non-skill associated factors might influence performance. But fundamentally, that is a difference between an RPG-based ecosystem and a typical FPS, MOBA, whatever. If you go play Overwatch, every tracer is tracer. All tracers are equal in terms of what they're capable of. If you get outplayed or you outplay somebody, it's because you were mechanically better at executing.
I'm fucking sick of this shit. Fuck! I might need to get the salt. I might have to.
In WoW, people have different gear, different stats, sometimes different choices they've made along the line, and that's not a new phenomenon. That's not something we're trying to introduce for the first time in a game that hasn't had it. I mean, you can go back and look at folks playing Classic right now, and whatever. You have Thunder Fury. Do you have Warglaives? Did you manage to get this? Do you have the one thing that your guild saw over the course of 3 months? Did you get that trinket? That's going to make a difference, and you might beat the other rogue or beat the other mage in your guild on a regular basis because of that character power factor. And that, and I get that, we hear this from top arena players. The higher up you go, the more that bothers you. But, and we understand that feedback, it's not a surprise to us, but across the totality of the game and the broader audience, it's that potential for differentiation between other characters, excitement, growth, and power.
Who here has been declined from a group for like a mythic +10 or a +15 or something like that because of the perceived power of your class? Interesting. It's the totality of chat. How interesting is that?
Or progression that isn't purely tied to your own skill that are some of the hallmarks of the genre. So I think that's where we try to inject choice and differentiation. And some of this isn't RNG, some of it is, but other parts are conscious decisions that a player made. Going back, so I think historically, gear served much more of this function in a way that wasn't as prominent. It wasn't like an advertised expansion feature. It's just how the game worked. And we have streamlined, kind of chipped away at some of those underlying factors in a way that risks removing that specialization entirely. And that's why you see us trying to reintroduce it, because we think there is value in one person's warrior being slightly different from another person's warrior based on choices they made in terms of areas they want to specialize in. Like going back
I'll let him finish.
Years, yeah, you needed a full separate set of tank gear from, your DPS gear.
Yes, but you could have both of them, and you could just go to the vendor and respec. You didn't need to fucking go through a big long quest line. It didn't have to be a whole involved piece of shit. It was completely fucking different. You could have one set of gear in your bags, the other set of gear in your bags, and you're wearing the third set. You have your PvP, your PvE, your tanking set. And you know what? You want to go and you want to use another fucking spec? You go respec. You play that spec. It's easy. It takes 10 fucking minutes. The difference is that you can work towards being competent and useful and good at all of them at the same time. Obviously, you specialize in one, but the other two, how many times have you done fucking Karazhan and BC? And something drops. It's for your tank spec. Hey, I need that for my off spec. And you know what? You get it for your off spec. And that's the way that it works. And with Covenants, here's what it's like with Covenants. It's imagine if with Covenants, you get all your fucking gear for DPS, and then the moment that you want to respec, it deletes your fucking gear. Fuck, man. It's such a bad comparison. It's such a bad fucking comparison. Because you could work towards those things simultaneously.
Today, it's pretty much just trinkets, maybe weapons, right? Whether it was different set pieces, different stats
then
that
fix
you needed,
the stats.
defense, parry, you name it. And the choices that you made every week, what is your loot specialization for this? Or what are you going to spend your currency on first, this item or that item, help shape someone's potential such that there was a meaningful difference between someone who specialized in playing one role or someone who played multiple. And both paths had their advantages. Like the person who was just, you know, tank all the time, they want to be the best tank in the world, they made every possible gearing decision around getting the best tank gear, they could be a few % better in terms of their overall mitigation, aside from their additional level of skill and comfort playing the spec, versus someone who was also playing a lot of DPS and gearing for that as well. But the latter player is much more versatile. If you need to drop a tank, or you know, you're playing a swing role, or you're participating in different types of activities in the game, there are tons of things they could do that the diehard tank could not. We've removed those barriers over time, and while that there's natural like quality of life improvement to that, like of course not having a restriction is always going to immediately feel better than having a restriction. Part of what we've seen over the history of WoW is that friction also has positive benefits that aren't immediately apparent until that friction is removed. Going all the way back to, you know, something like the random group finder and LFG. And sure, it's super easy and convenient to be able to push a button and have a group of group mates to run a dungeon with, but did that do some things to erode a sense of community and fellowship? Sure it did.
Yeah.
And
that's
similarly,
really
a lot
good
of
to hear.
Choices we've made mechanically to streamline spec switching, multi-role play, again, they have lots of upsides, but taken too far, they risk too much homogenization in a way that removes depth.
There's a few things there that are interesting.
I'm really glad he said that. I'm glad that he said that. That Ian is right about that, I think. I 100% agree with that. Removing LFR confirmed. Well, it was they should have never added LFR. They should have never added LFD either. They should only have like LFD maybe for like normal dungeons or leveling dungeons. And you know they know that. Like, you know that's what they think, because that's why they make all of the dungeon progression besides heroic that nobody ever fucking does. They make it to where you have to make groups. Like, it was a huge mistake for them to make that, and now they can't get rid of it. And the best thing that they can do now is just make it invalid, or like make it not give any gear, and then nobody will give a shit about it.
Points. And I'm just thinking, everything you described about the players who were able to prioritize where they wanted to go, other players who prioritized in going multi-different wings, it keeps coming back to me that was still entirely, even from the very earliest days of World of Warcraft, from day one, that was still something that was entirely in the players' hands, and every single one of them had the choice to do that should they want to. Like, the barriers we're talking about are, say, gold, for example.
Yeah.
That would be the only barrier to prevent you to do that, rather than your interest. So while it's true that, you know, somebody who goes pure DPS or whatever on their Demon Hunter, sure, they'll reach a point where they're maybe slightly better than the other guy, but that was the other player's complete freedom to be able to say, well, I'm still a demon hunter and I like tanking and I want to go that way as well. And obviously this varies across the player base. Is we can look at certain players and they'll do all 3 specs if they want to. And that's entirely their choice. And the game has never at any point said, well, we're actually going to actively stop you doing that. We're going to prevent you from doing that because in your minds, you don't want that to happen anymore. And that's where I think we kind of hit this wall. Is like, you're actively saying we can't do that anymore, despite the fact that we've enjoyed that freedom if we wanted to do it.
Well, it's like if you have a fucking off-spec and you can't get any gear for your off-spec at all. You could work towards your off-spec. It would take longer than your main spec, but you could have 2 specs of gear. Like in classic WoW, my Fury gear is not as good as my tanking gear, but it's still pretty good. In Shadowlands, it's like that choice. You can't have a little bit of both. You have to only go in one direction.
For many, many years. Coming back to the RPG thing as well, and this is a little confusing.
I'm going to be bald at the end of the video.
To obviously try and appease everybody, which is what we would like to see happen. Is all the elements are seemingly in place in Shadowlands to not even have this be a big deal. All the soulbinds, for example, are all part of the main story quests of every zone. We encounter them, we make friends with them, we help them. They're all people there.
True.
And for me, and maybe I'm way off base here, but if we're looking to really instill this sense of RPG, which the Covenants do, if I think about the best RPGs I've played, everything from Mass Effect to New Vegas, old people games, I guess. we're in old people territory. I think about my companions that I choose. In Baldur's Gate, I choose my companions, and I try and build that squad. So if I choose to go Kyrian, because I love everything about Kyrian, but the soulbinds are just, they're not right, okay? Like, we went live, they're not right. Some of them are completely over the top. We're already aware of, and obviously the lofty goal is to make sure this isn't the case, but historically it has been the case.
Every single
there's
time.
some way out of whack. And you don't even get to try the soulbinds or see the soulbinds until you cap, unless you're somebody who's going to do extra research. Then wouldn't it not be a better, even RPG immersive element to say, right, I really want that Venthyr soulbind. That comes with the Venthyr ability. I'm going to go pick them up. And now I have a story quest. I have some sort of RPG immersion factor to try and convince this Venthyr to help me as a Kyrian because of the good of the Shadowlands, and they all have different personalities and they respond to it differently. And that's part of my journey on my role playing, is to immerse myself in that, because I don't think of any game where I say the most, the biggest role playing element I had in Baldur's Gate was that I chose Fireball over Frostbolt, or that I chose a machine gun over a sniper rifle in Fallout, or any of those things. What I think about is the stories I told, what I decided to do with those companions that I thought in. And that's why it seems like a strange, potentially, hill to die on here. If this, if we do come out this way and the players across the board, not just the high end, start looking at things with a bit of green-eyed envy and say... Well,
I think the point that the two, that Preach isn't bringing up, and also Ian doesn't seem to realize, is that it's not like WoW is not an RPG. It's an MMORPG. That means it's not just, you don't just make decisions like it's an RPG. Like, they're making these decisions without the context of the way that players are going to approach them. That's the problem, is that they're not taking in the contextual player base that will deal with these problems. More of an MMO than an RPG? Well, yeah. That's the issue.
Well, everything's here to not even have this be a big deal.
It's not a single-player game.
Enhance the RPG elements of the game. Make them even more immersive. And really double down on the Covenant system.
So I think, when we say RPG is definitely a bit of an overloaded term. There is the, role-playing in the narrative fantasy sense, and then there's the crunchy or stat-driven role-playing where, yes, the, machine gun versus sniper rifle, or are you a stealth expert, or are you better at speech, or, hand-to-hand combat, or whatever else, that also tends to lead towards, that's differentiation different toolkits that lead to you solving different problems differently. Yes, we have the ability to shape the narrative however we please. We certainly could have told a totally different story where covenants work in a different way and anyone can soulbind with anyone. Yes, we consciously chose to focus on gameplay differentiation first and craft the narrative in support of that. And so part of it comes down to, and I know this is, it risks getting a bit circular, but we are trying to get these systems, the details of these systems, out in front of players far earlier than something like Azerite, to allow us to better spot, iterate, refine, redesign pieces of it in order to avoid the problem where, yes, there's, someone falls into a trap where all of their soulbinds are subpar and they completely regret their choice. But at the end of the day,
they're setting themselves up for failure, and they're basically what they're gonna do. I said this on Twitter the other day, is that the reason why they thought Azerite armor wasn't good is they assumed that players didn't fully understand it. What I think they're going to do is Covenants will not be in a finished state on release of Shadowlands. They won't be in a finished state in 9.2. There'll be changes in 9.3 that will change Covenants probably in a substantial way. I can guarantee it, because every single time that they've ever done a feature in the game, they've changed it every fucking patch. Like with the Heart of Azeroth, then we had the fucking essences. And you're going to have extra levels of complexities that they're going to add in the future. And what Blizzard is going to do is they're going to rationalize players' dislike for the Covenant system by telling themselves that the players have not fully been able to see it and understand the system, and if they did, they would like it. And that's exactly what they did with Azerite armor, and they're setting themselves up to do it again with Covenants. It's going to happen. Just fucking wait.
So getting back to the topic of choice from way earlier.
Yeah.
My contention is that WoW has enough, probably more than enough, ways in which you can customize your loadout going into a particular encounter. If you're about to pull a boss, you are potentially changing your spec, going over all of your talent rows, making sure that your talent choices are what you want them to be, looking at what trinkets you have equipped, or other particular gear choices within that.
Essences, corruptions,
consumables, within the Covenant system in Shadowlands, picking which soulbind you're going to use, which active branch of your soulbind you're going to have. You can be changing, a half dozen different buttons on your bar, the capabilities of your character in very meaningful ways from moment to moment. And adding an extra layer on top of that, that's not an area that needs further development, really. So we approached this system from the perspective of trying to shore up something that we feel has been lost over the course of the last few expansions, where there wasn't enough longer-term differentiation between people who were fire mages or people who were arms warriors, people who were holy priests, because they could change basically everything about themselves from moment to moment with no friction.
Right.
The reason they did that is because people wanted that. People wanted that to happen because being stuck with one spec or something like that wasn't enjoyable. That's what they wanted. And also, I think a lot of this really, with the whole Covenant system, one thing to keep in mind is that we don't really know what the Covenant system is going to look like for respec costs. So, if it's 20,000 gold or something like that to respec your Covenant, who cares? But if it's a week-long process of farming a bunch of stupid bullshit and a bunch of other things as well, it go off spec, I don't care, 20k. Well, what I mean is I think that respecing your Covenant is going to be a long investment of time, and maybe 20k is too much. Okay, let's just forget about the number. But the point is that if it's a amount of gold that you would consider reasonable, like an Azerite respec or something like that, I think it'd be okay. We don't know what the cost is to go back and forth between Covenants. And I think if we did, it would be easier for players to understand and give better feedback of how it feels. I think we really need to have an idea of what does it actually look like to go from Venthyr to Kyrian and then go back to Venthyr. Like, what actually is that process? And I think Ian should try to explain that, or Blizzard should try to explain that as soon as possible. I said multiple weeks. Well, I'll wait.
I'm just not sure that I understand the goal. I really do. I'm fully on board with the idea behind it. I don't think, from what we've seen and what we've tested, that's the mark we're getting even close to in a lot of cases. So if I think that the difference, if I look at something like a DK, and someone tries to make the case to me that Shackle the Unworthy, a single target arcane dot for my Death Knight, is an immersive choice, I have to completely disagree with them and say that's I don't see it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see it. When we're talking about a lot of these spells, and I think we really need to bring up the issue here, which is quite clear on its own. Like, we're talking about, maybe you're talking about the balancing system, and we want to try and get it right. And that was exactly the same comment that we had with Azerite Armor, which never worked out throughout the entire BFA. Is that we want you to make sure you don't have a wrong choice. And we never got there. Like, at any point. We didn't get there. And that's fair. We kind of moved on from there and we moved past it.
We never fucking did we, dude? We never fucking did. It never happened. It's the same with a lot of these other fucking Legion Legendaries. There was Legion Legendaries that were dog shit at the end of the fucking expansion. Like, maybe they had, like, one use. Oh, you use this for Mage Tower. But for the most part, yes, they were always dog shit. The whole time.
And this time around, we're now looking at things, certain spells that don't work even across the entire spec. So if you look at Primordial Wave for a Shaman, Mirrors of Torment for a Mage, those are spells that actually, Mirrors of Torment, for example, doesn't have any real practical use during the leveling experience. So you're likely to not think that's particularly good. Yet watching Zaryu last night test it out with Venruki was amazing. They were using it so well. Those players are going to be like,
misleading.
Oh, that's actually really good. But while I was leveling, it was garbage.
Yeah.
And now I'm a Shaman, and I think you still play a Shaman. So if you look at Primordial Wave, for example, pretty cool for your main spec, which is Resto. So I'm going to commit to that. But quite literally almost a dead button if you were to go to enhancement. Like, the way it works just doesn't pan out at all.
No.
And we're looking at these scenarios and saying, well, we'll tweak this and we'll tweak that. And I understand that we can do that. But we're midway through the year now, and we obviously want Shadowlands to be out this year. And it's a case of,
yes, we do,
like, three things here for me. One, it looks like these spells don't actually provide that level of immersion compared to what potentially could be there just through straight storytelling. And I think a lot of people feel that way. It's like they look at some of these spells and like, well, it's a slightly green sword for Necrolords, right? For the Paladin. It's a green, it's a slightly green hammer. Am I now immersed and feel the might of the Scourge throwing through me? Not particularly. But some of them are really good. And then how much of a sacrifice are you guys willing to make to people's gameplay to really force this in? Because we haven't, like I say, it's not like choosing a class. Like, a class comes with 3 specs with whole spell books worth of things to play around with. They all work differently. They have 3 talent trees amongst them. And they're all mixing and matching. You get so much when you choose a class. And I've heard you mention this as like a subclass. And I'm like, is a subclass really 2 spells and a passive? Because in no other game, I don't think we would get away with that. And it feels like if we were going full immersion, so they were a subclass, there would be more in terms of the gameplay side. And it does feel like we've not quite got there yet, unless you have more things planned.
Sure. I mean, so subclass is more of that's the general vibe. Clearly, it's a tiny fraction of what a class offers. I mean, using analogies to other games, if you think you're familiar with Path of Exile, like an Ascendant you might pick in that game is technically a vague form of subclass, even though it's just a few passives, but they can be pretty transformative.
And if you want to change your Ascendancy, it takes like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You just go do Uber Lab again and respec your shit.
So I think when we talk about immersion, yes, for some people, the thing that draws them to a class or to a covenant may just be like the visceral feel and the fantasy of pushing an ability using a button.
Yeah.
But
being a warrior,
that's kind of the overloading of the term RPG. It's I think a lot of people, you hear RPG and you think of somebody LARPing in a field, but it also could be, I want to specialize in this strength over that one. is my Death Knight going to be stronger at single target damage than Death Knights of other covenants? Not necessarily massively stronger, but marginally stronger, to the point that I might, compared to the other Death Knight in my raid group, outperform them in some ways if there are specific role assignments.
Not necessarily massively stronger. Not necessarily massively stronger. Not, you know, like, really? I mean, come on. That means, like, every time these things have, like, created these massive differences in power. Like, look at Twilight Devastation for tanks versus Gushing Wounds. Look at Test of Might for warriors versus, like, Seismic Wave. These are not even in the same universe. Thunderous Blast at the beginning of the expansion. Exactly. Like, they're not even in the same universe. This has never happened before.
Someone needs to tunnel the boss versus someone peeling off to handle ads. That might be something that you or your raid leader take into account when figuring out how your group in particular is going to approach solving a problem. Like, those are the sorts of things that we think about and that I talk about when I'm saying RPG customization.
Mm-hmm.
When something is completely flexible, when you can change your loadout for the situation, as you and so many others point out, there is a right answer. And that's something that, it might be not known immediately. The very first guilds to crack the puzzle will try different approaches, but it gets solved. And then what trickles down throughout the community, as we've seen over time, is, well, this is the right way to play. This is the spec you should be here for this type of content. These are the talents that you should have.
Yep.
And if you're not, that actually, like, I know a lot of the anxiety that players have outside of the, cutting edge, or the people who personally hate the idea of being, only 99% of optimal, of not getting the orange parse or, the gold parse. The anxiety people have is the imagined just fear that one day they're going to apply for a group, get asked what their covenant is, they're going to say Venthyr or Kyrian, and get declined and told no thanks, because
it's not going to happen. Like, it's like that might happen. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to do a dungeon, or they're going to do a raid, and they're going to do lower damage because they're using a covenant that does lower damage. And then because their overall damage is lower, they will get replaced by somebody who is not. Like, that's not... they're not going to ask you and interrogate you what your covenant is. It's the same as in Legion. Yes, maybe you could do enough damage in Emerald Nightmare without the legendaries. But if you had the legendaries, you're going to be in the raid all the time. And if you don't, you're on standby. Maybe they will. Maybe they will. Listen, guys, maybe they will. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but honestly, like, it helps my argument, so I'll just let it go, okay? But I think that it's really just going to be the overall output of the character is going to be lower, and because the overall output is lower, then those people don't get invited to groups. They get replaced with other people that have higher output because they made better decisions that are numerically based. That's the way it goes now. And even if that, and let's say you guys are right. Let's say you guys are right with this covenant shit. And what you're saying about it, increasing your, the people asking about it, that's the exact shit that the dude that donated said happened to him. Is that he played a Shadow Priest, and people thought Mythic Plus Shadow Priests were bad, so he didn't get invited to groups. Doesn't matter how good he is. It matters what spec he plays.
Yeah. You picked wrong. And what I think the way that trickles down is when you have complete, this may be a little bit of, I don't know, irony, but having complete control over something can in a way remove your freedom. If you can pick your spec, if you can pick your talent with no restriction, then when a pug leader or someone is evaluating you and asks, well, are you fire or frost for their Mythic Plus group? Well, if you say you're not fire, they probably just implied or assumed 20 different things about you. Like, well, you must not be someone who cares about performance, because if you were, you'd be fired.
Yeah.
You probably don't know a whole lot about the game in a bunch of ways. You're probably someone who's going to stand in a lot of mechanics, and you're one of those weird people who prioritizes, personal fun and the feel of your abilities over big numbers and big polls and timing keys, and so declined. And that's unavoidable to an extent, because people are based on trying to make judgments based on limited information among a pool of applicants, whether it's a pug leader or someone trying to figure out who to bench. But when something isn't in time, when everyone knows that people had to make choices, and this is the legendary they crafted first, and they didn't craft this other one first, or this is what they got as a drop, or they didn't get this, or they chose this covenant and not that one, that doesn't necessarily imply all of those things about you, because you can't change it freely. I think people weren't in Legion, declining people for pugs, certainly early on when people were much more limited in their selection of legendaries because they didn't have a specific legendary, because that wasn't.
I don't get it. Like, they don't even play their game. They actually don't play their game. That happened all the time. People lost raid spots all the time for this. Like, I can't even believe he's saying this. I really can't even believe it. They have no clue what they're talking about.
A reasonable thing to ask of somebody or to assume, and
it was, and they did. And it wasn't something like, oh, do you have... It wasn't like that. That's what he doesn't understand. It wasn't about link the right legendary. It was about join the raid, and then your damage is low because you don't have the right legendary, and you get fucking replaced. It's not the item. It's the outcome of having the item. I don't understand. Like, it's just, I'm so mad.
You weren't reading in a bunch of things about their character or how they played the game.
I'm really confused on this, actually. I'm not seeing how we've linked making players increasing exclusion possibilities, because there's more points of failure now.
Yeah.
Increases the ability of people pugging to not be judged. I'm very confused as to how we've got from A to B there. It's like there is a case study of Ian being wrong with this with Classic WoW. There are multiple specs in Classic WoW that don't fucking work, and if you play them, you don't get invited. Period. This is the same fucking thing. If we watch the
and does it matter? By the way, does it matter if they ever bring a Ret Paladin? No, it doesn't matter. They're going to clear the raid anyway. We cleared the raid in 30 minutes, PWL in 30 minutes, with like 2 Rets. You don't need a perfect group, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to stop people from over-inviting warriors, not inviting Ret Paladins, not inviting Moonkins. You can clear the raid with all Ret Paladins. You can clear the raid with all Moonkins. It'll be harder, sure, but the game's easy, and people still don't do it. Shadowlands is a lot fucking harder than, I guarantee you it's going to be a lot fucking harder than BWL. There's a literal fucking, like, today, this shit's happening.
And everyone plays Venthyr. And certainly I'm dreading what might happen at the next World First race if we are watching Limit swapping on the last few bosses all around. That trickle-down effect is ultimately inevitable. Like, all the information that people look for, like, we checked a lot of the resources that people check, from Icy Veins to Blood Mallet, etc., and they're getting millions of hits per month of people just checking what is best because they like it simple. They like it nice and simple. I just want to get what's best, and then I know what to aim for, I can target it, and I can go for it. I'm really unsure as to how creating fixed exclusion characteristics, such as, we know, I've watched the stream, I've learnt this information, I've read a website, I've read Wowhead, And on there it says, hey, what's the covenant situation? Oh, you're a mage? Well, your top one is going to be Necrolord for DPS, and then your worst one is going to be X. And then when it comes to the Pug world, who make their own rules, I certainly don't agree with those rules, but now we're going to a situation where not only is the class a problem, which is something that has been historically been the issue.
People in chat are saying that they're trying to move away from that mentality. It's impossible. You can't move away from that mentality. Just throw that out the window. You can't do it. It's not going to work. You literally just can't do it. So if you try to do that, you're just going to end up ruining the game.
It's like, why would I take, say, a Windwalker? Well, Windwalkers are great. They're super fun to play. Yeah, but they're not part of the meta. I watched blah, 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 and this information passes on. And now we're a Windwalker with, or a warrior even with a Covenant that these people consider. We've added another point of failure with the Covenants.
Yep.
How that improves their situation instead of make it worse.
So, I mean, some of that obviously depends on, again, it's tunings and the vast extremes. If there is, if as you said, there is a best Covenant for Mage, and it's just like, that's just the good DPS Covenant, and the others are the bad DPS Covenant, then yes, you may see that gravitation over time. But if it turns into this Covenant offers these advantages, but that Covenant offers these different advantages that may be better suited to several raid encounters, but you know lots of good players are members of that Covenant, you're not using that as a filter in the same way anymore. You know, MDI stuff...
Really? You're not using that as a filter? Can Shadow Priest do plus 15s? Yes. Do they get invited to plus 15s? No. People use everything as a filter. Like, that's not... It's not true. Like, it's simply something that's not true.
You know, we've obviously just recently seen triple hunter comps and all night elf groups, and those filters are not applied to pugs.
I wouldn't design a game around that.
It's what spec you choose, something that you could change by pushing a button with no friction. If you're not choosing to change it in a way that makes you optimal, there must be a reason for that, is what I think the underlying mentality can often be. And that leads to people being more forced to make choices that don't necessarily align with their own personal playstyle preferences or what's fun for them because of perceived pug metas. Again, it's a nuanced aspect to it, but the contention is that a world where people have different strengths and weaknesses, and that's the key. There have to be situations where the choice you made pays off, where you feel like, okay, yes, I was a bit lower on the damage meters, but I didn't have quite as much utility on that encounter. But on this boss, I'm really glad I made this choice, and my buddy who made a different choice is a bit envious of me here.
No. And here's something that I also want to mention. Have they said once anything about PvP? No. They've completely forgotten about PvP. So, even if, let's say this works for PvE, which it obviously won't, but let's say it works for PvE, it's going to be a disaster for PvP too. Like, and this is one big part of the Covenants that I don't think enough people are talking about, because most of the content creators that are really popular are PvE players. And they're like most focused, like most PvPers just play the fucking game, honestly, besides Sidu, who tweets about how much it sucks all the time. Shout out to Sidu, my man. So listen, at least somebody's fucking saying it. And this is going to be bad for PvPers as well. Also on top of that, here's how it's going to work. So there's going to be a Covenant that's better. There's going to be a Covenant that's better. Like, let's say there are 10 instances, 10 bosses. There's a Covenant that's better on 1 boss, Covenant that's better on 3 bosses, Covenant that's better on 4 bosses, and a Covenant that's better on 5. Okay? Or the best. Let's say the best. Because there could be like interchangeability. People are still going to want to go to the Covenant that's better on the most bosses. It's simple. Yes, you're right. They're not going to go every single boss. There might be an exception with 1 boss where 1 Covenant is better. But the overall majority, this Covenant is the best. And you know what people are going to pick? That fucking Covenant. That's what happens in Mythic Plus, for example. So in Mythic Plus, there are certain talents that will give you more AoE damage. But nobody picks those in Mythic Plus because the overall dungeon rewards another talent. All of these talents will be weighted against each other, and people's performance will change. Also, let's say there's a really big ad wave, and you have to AoE down the ad wave, and you have one Covenant ability that really makes it good for AoEing down the ad wave. Except the difference is that the ad wave isn't a point of difficulty in the fight. So you're designing the fight, and the point of difficulty in the fight is something that's irrelevant. So, like, yeah, wow, you're so good at AoEing down these ads that don't fucking matter. Like, this is assuming so many things. I'm... Oh my god. What's the solution then? Just let people respec Covenants freely. Let them do the quest line. After they do the quest line for the Covenant, they can just go back and forth. That's what I think the solution is. If they want to limit it at all, make it like once a week. That's obviously the solution. You guys are saying no, just want to ruin the fucking game. There's no reason for this. There's no reason to add an arbitrary barrier for people to fuck themselves over with. It adds nothing positive to the game. This like theoretical RPG element exists only in their minds.
As long as there's that back and forth, and again, as long as it's not so swingy that you're getting benched or not, and again, at the limit end of the spectrum, of course, that's a whole different arena. But even in serious, you know, cutting-edge mythic guilds,
yeah,
some variation in strengths and weaknesses is natural and accepted, and people approach solving problems a bit differently based on their personal rosters. How many immunities they have, do they have more AoE or less AoE? Even if in the limit world, yeah, there is a mathable solution to that problem. You just class stack to perfect your comp.
Yeah.
Having different solutions to problems is something that adds depth, frankly. Like that's a lot of what it boils down to. It's just, is everyone just painting by numbers and approaching every dungeon, every raid encounter, every matchup in the exact same way? Or are they looking at the strengths and weaknesses they have based on everything from which legendary they crafted first, which by the way is, you know, it's not RNG, but there's a choice there, right? Like, which spec are you making your first legendary for, your second legendary for? Which role are you focusing on? Single target? Are you focusing on AoE? Early on, those are things that are going to be differentiators, and you can't easily swap that. A month from now, you'll have all the legendaries that you want, or both of them, but
that's why people are okay with it, because they know that they're going to get them all. They know that, like, yeah, I want to focus on this now, but I'll be able to get the other ones later. That's why they're okay with it. With Covenants, you're never going to get the other ones later. If they make it to where you can, then yeah, it'd be okay.
Doing those first pulls on that first mythic boss, there's a choice to be made there. Okay. And it's that type of choice that we consider an interesting one.
Well, I think it's a subjective thing. I know you have to leave in a second. I mean, for me, making those choices on an encounter-counter basis is so meaningful and so interesting to me, compared to what we're potentially doing in the Shadowlands. Like, I consider that the most meaningful choice is to figure out my character and what I'm going into. I have a couple of, I guess, parting questions on here.
Sure.
What is your confidence level on, given the past history, and like, have you changed anything? That we've seen individual systems come in and be completely skewed from a huge delta between the top.
Before the confidence level, let's look at the success level. 0.
Most effective to the least effective, and now you're adding several of them at once, which have the potential to compound on each other, even in small ways, each of them, which all add up to each other. How confident are you that we are going to be in a situation where it doesn't particularly matter, and you're going to get that feeling that you didn't make a wrong choice, given what we've had in the past?
Let's see.
I mean, there's no answer to this question that won't come back to bite me in various forms. I look forward to reading Ian Hazzikostas quotes on Twitter.
He's right about that.
It's our goal. You know, are we going to get it perfect? No. Are we going to have to make some changes? Yes. Are we going to be guided in those changes by trying to not like invert rankings? If something is massively OP in one situation, we're going to try to adjust it in a way that keeps it the best in that situation, but just not have such a large gap that it makes it seem like the only viable option. Are we going to get that wrong sometimes? Yes. Our goal right now is to get as much feedback as possible. There's a lot of, some of the abilities that you've mentioned in this chat are some of the ones that are on our radar, and there's a lot of good discussion about others. We know we need to make significant changes to a lot of these. There's 48 different abilities across the covenants. Some of them...
So he just knows that it's going to be fucked up. Like, he knows it's going to be fucked. I mean, we're going into it knowing it's going to be fucked. Just knowing for a fact it's going to be messed up, man.
Need to be redesigned. Some need substantial numbers tweaks. We know that, and we've left ourselves time to do that.
Okay.
So our goal is to do as much of that as possible during beta, and then make conservative changes once we're live. And if something's a bit out of whack, we probably leaned more towards doing that in a patch in the next tier with a lot of advance notice so people can plan around it, versus you log in one day and the rules have changed out from under you in a way that you can't adapt to.
Okay. My final question then before you go, just a quick one, is...
so they're just like setting themselves up to tell people that we're going to fix it, in 9.3, 9.2, 9.1, and... Oh, God. All this theoretical decision-making stuff really drives me fucking crazy, man. Like, it's so theoretical, and... let me finish the video.
Internally, are you guys still thinking, knowing, and I think you guys do know, this is going to have a disruptive effect to a lot of people's gameplay?
Yeah, it will.
That you think the benefit of just the player power, not the no one wants to swap covenants, no one wants to do anything like that, but just the player power element is worth it for what you're trying to achieve here?
We do continue to think that, yes.
Okay.
And I think our goal is, and the conversation
wrong.
I'd love to continue to have with the community in the next couple of months is, what are the biggest problems? What are the areas of greatest worry? What are the things that are going to make this fail? Let's try to target those. Let's try to shore those areas up. Is there the fallback option at the end of the day of removing all the restrictions and, okay, you can just mix and match and you can switch this stuff much more freely? If we need to pull that ripcord, it exists. But
when are we doing that?
That is seen as a last recourse.
Okay. We're doing that in 9.3 Preach. In 9.3, they'll let us swap the abilities. Yeah, and sorry. No, my bad. 9.3.5. 9.3.5.
I know I'm running low on time. There's one thing I actually wanted to share or talk about.
Okay, here we go.
Conduits. Everybody loves conduits, right?
No.
Okay.
So destructibility, we agree that's a problem. It's something we've been talking a lot about. I think we're often hesitant to admit things that we know things aren't successful designs until we have an alternate proposal. But yeah, I think you've talked a lot about the so-called mythic tax. I think the design of semi-permanence, but it can be overcome and made flexible by a lot of really annoying grinding and re-earning the same conduits over and over again. That is a recipe for frustration.
Yep.
And yes, it is.
The goal here is to encourage, again, meaningful choice where your character is stronger in some ways and weaker in others. And having that choice that's meaningful, except you can do this really annoying thing for a few hours every week and get the best of both worlds.
Right.
We know where that's going to lead. We saw that with Azerite respecking, and fools that we were.
Why didn't you fix it for the whole expansion? Like, then why didn't you fix it? It's been in the game the whole time. It's been, like, we've had when did BFA come out? It came out 2 years ago. It's been 2 fucking years? Why not fix it today? Let him finish? What's he gonna say? I'll finish. Whatever.
In our minds, we're like, well, okay, we started off with the idea that Azerite armor was permanent. You lock in these traits, and it's like, and to some extent, arguably, that's more flexible than a regular piece of gear. Like, this item drops, and it's a healer trinket, or this item drops, and it's a tank trinket. The way Azerite worked was, well, do you want this to be this or that? Dial it in, lock it in. But then, of course, the immediate feedback that we got internally before anyone had seen this was, well, what if I make the wrong choice? What if I misclick? What if I, I've never even seen this trait before and I want to try it out? Well, that's terrible. Okay, let's let you change it. And then that led to the idea of, what if we have this exponentially increasing cost? That way, no one will just swap these back and forth repeatedly.
Why do you guys not like that, Ian? I don't get why you guys have a problem with it. It's our choice, right?
Well, again, part of that is it gets back to what things should be customizable encounter to encounter, situation to situation.
It's more theoretical fucking bullshit. You know, the theoretical, oh yeah, you should have this. Here's the reality. You want to hear Aaron's theory? That's great. Here's the fucking reality. 5 fucking helmets in my bags. 4 different shoulders, 8 different chest pieces. That's the fucking reality. This pie in the sky theory that they have doesn't translate to good gameplay. Theory versus reality. Yeah, it's a cool theory. It doesn't work. Stop designing the game around the fucking theory.
What things are static?
Are you kidding me?
I guess our vision is a balance of the two, with the vast majority being customizable, right? And that's, again, you change your talents, you change your spec, you change all that stuff.
Yeah, it's so fun.
But yeah, so conduits, we recognize this is heading down that same path. Now, we don't want to jump to, we've seen the discussions of, hey, just make them like essences, which again are exactly in that mode right now of something you can pick per encounter.
Probably a good idea.
Because that's a whole lot of extra stuff. It's basically, okay, before every encounter, you are now, in addition to talents, in addition to your spec, in addition to all of this, evaluating which of these many different conduits you're going to activate in each of these nodes. The game doesn't need more of that. And so we're trying to think through some middle ground where it is a semi-permanent decision. You have flexibility, but you can't change it from boss to boss. You can't, change it from dungeon to dungeon. But there isn't some overhanging tax or penalty or just really annoying thing that you're going to have to do, because we know that if that's an option, you're going to do it for the sake of optimality. So we don't have a solution to announce yet, which is why normally
such a build-up.
Normally we don't talk about stuff until we have a solution to announce, because it's frustrating. But I just wanted to make it clear that.
All right.
That's good. I'm glad Ian said this. Okay, like I don't want to meme on him or anything like that. I'm glad Ian said this. I think that he completely understands what the players' concerns are with conduits, and it seems like Blizzard is taking the right direction with conduits. I'm very happy to hear it.
Going to go live.
Everyone is so excited. I can feel them shaking around the world.
This is a good thing.
He's about to say it. He's going to say it.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
We're not going to go live with the destructible conduits as they are now.
Okay.
We know there are some fundamental flaws with that design. It is a super hot topic of internal conversation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. It was great to actually do this, and it's been amazing to see how different it has been with the Shadowlands. I said it's the same thing to Morgan, is having opportunities like this just to see where things are, and also the interviews we've had, not just with myself, but everybody around the community, and getting involved, and looking at what you did with enhancement with some tweaks has just been incredible. And we look forward to more class design. Obviously, Shadow Priest and things are still waiting with bated breath.
Yep.
Yeah, you've heard a thing or two. Okay. So I really hope you guys continue on with this. Apparently, I have a lot of people saying, when's the next beta wave?
Soon.
I mean, ongoing. I think we just got done with the last one, but yeah, I think basically every week from now until the end of beta, we're going to be continuing to expand the invite pool. I mean, really, what we're looking at on our end is just server concurrency. We know there's a lot of people who jump in, log in once, say, okay, cool, Shadowlands, and then log off, and they don't come back. Then there's others who are really testing seriously. We want to keep a certain level of concurrency, and we're going to keep
the real shit
opening up that spigot to keep the servers relatively full as it takes.
Okay. So no date, but soon. Ish.
Yep, basically,
yeah, like
every week it'll
event.
be rolling.
Yeah. And you've been super consistent with that as well, so that's awesome. All right, thank you very much for your time, Ian. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Likewise. It's been a pleasure chatting.
I look forward to the raid testing as well, so have a great day.
Likewise. Take care. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end. Like I say, it was very much a case of not an interview style, more of a conversation, which is probably different than what you guys are used to. I think we got most of the way through that. And no doubt many of us don't agree with everything that was said, but I tried to press as much as possible. I hope you're okay with that. I'm just going to have a...
Can we get some hearts in the chat for Preach before I start getting too fucking mad? Preach is a literal god, a paragon of our community, and the fact that he was able to do this and represent us in this kind of way is absolutely fucking amazing, and he deserves everybody's support because this is an amazing interview. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for watching this. Preach, thank you very much for doing this. This has been fucking amazing. What really pisses me the fuck off is the fact that Ian can sit there and say that Azerite armor respecs are a problem and not fix it. Like, just fix it. If it's a problem, just fix it. And this is the kind of stuff that I have a problem with, okay? This is the kind of shit that I don't fucking like. If Azerite armor is a problem and respecs doubling is a problem, then why not just make it cap at 10,000 gold? This is a problem, but we won't fix it. Yeah, why? Why not? Well, if it's a problem, he's the fucking game director. I don't understand this. This is what makes me mad. It's the same thing with what he was saying with Azerite gear. I don't know, man. That's the problem that I have. Hard-coded, it's impossible to fix. It's not impossible to fucking fix, man. It's the thing that they're saying it as if it's like this, like fucking irreversible change. They're the ones that made the change. If they want to log on today and make everybody's character log in and be a fucking giraffe, they can do that because they're literally God in the game. Don't tell me it's a bad choice and then you stick by the bad choice for 2 fucking years and make people play a dysfunctional version of the game because you, for some reason, think that it's a bad choice but don't want to change the bad choice that you have admitted is a bad choice. Why? Why the fuck do you do that? What? You ready to do Ny'alotha?
Yeah, are you sure you want to do it now?
I don't give a fuck anymore, man.
What are you talking about?
I'm so pissed off about this shit.
Why?
I promised Ny'alotha because they don't fucking know what they're doing, man. Like how that, tell me this, McConnell. How can Ian say that Azerite armor respecs are a problem whenever Azerite armor respecs have been a problem for 2 years?
I don't know. It's maybe he's out of touch or something.
Well, if he's out of touch, then he would say that they're not a problem.
Who gives a shit? Azerite sucks dick.
I'm not happy about this.
There's nothing we can do. That's out of your control. They clearly have a different vision of the game than anybody else.
And they're blind. They're blind to the way that people play the game. They do have a new vision. You're 100% right. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. I am so sick of this, man. I am so absolutely unbelievably sick of this shit.
Well, what are you gonna do? Quit?
No, I'm gonna complain on the forums like a normal person. I will complain on the forums and get mad about this and make threads about it and talk about it until eventually something changes in 2 years and I will take credit for it even though it took 2 years. That's what I will do.